This is your spiritual game plan, and I'm your host, Sherry Fletcher. Change. It happens to all of us. You've invested your time and energy into an important role, sometimes for years. Then suddenly it's time for you to move on. Maybe you've worked hard on a dream, and now your path is taking a new turn, but the dream isn't going with you. Perhaps you've raised your kids, and now they've moved on, but your empty nest is filled with parent care. Maybe you're in the middle of diaper changes and laundry piles. If you find yourself asking questions like, where do I fit in anymore? Am I even relevant? How do I find my purpose now? You are in the right place. This is the show for women in a season of transition. I believe that while your roles in life will change, your purpose is eternal. I'm here to help you understand just how intentionally you were made by a creator with a game plan. Through interviews and inspirational guests, we'll discover ways to help you unlock the purpose God placed in you, develop a game plan for your life's calling, and embrace the intentional masterpiece you were created to be. Today, I'll be talking with Katie Reid, the author of Made Like Martha and the podcast host of The Mary and Martha Show. Katie is also a singer and a songwriter and a fan of hot cocoa and Christmas lights. Katie, her husband, and 5 children live in Michigan, where the wonder of the holiday season is never far away. Katie encourages women to walk in freedom as they live out their God-given purpose. And today, Katie and I will be talking about her new book, A Very Bavarian Christmas. There are so many wonderful takeaways in this book, and it's one that I highly recommend as we start off the holiday season that, like the family living in Bavarian Falls, looks very different from what we had planned. All right, one more time. Katie, thank you so much for joining me today. And this is the last episode of season 1, and I'm so glad I get to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me, Sherry. It's a joy to be here, and congrats on your first season of your podcast. That is so exciting.
It has been so much fun. You know, we were talking a little bit before, and you and I met when I won some time with you. You are a coach, and through Hope Writers, I won some time getting some coaching from you. And from there, a friendship has blossomed and sparked, and I have talked to you previously on Facebook. We covered your other book, Made Like Martha. And so I'm just so glad that you're here. And I would love if you would share a little bit about you and your family, and then how has God used your ministry this year, and then a little bit about your holidays coming up.
Sure. So I'm Katie Reid. I live in the middle of Michigan with my husband, Adam. He's a pastor at our church, and we have 5 loud and wonderful kids ranging in age from 4 to 16. We have 2 girls, our bookends, 3 active boys in the middle. And yeah, I'm a writer, speaker, podcaster. I am not bored, Sherry, not bored.
Not bored.
And so ministry wise this year, man, I know we're all tired of hearing the word pivot, but when I had all these, I was going to have the most speaking engagements I'd ever had. I actually had one in Maryland in March, and it was right kind of before everything shut down. Like things were still like okay then, but within like 5 days, we were here in Michigan in quarantine and all of the things. And because I didn't have these speaking engagements, I actually started doing some songwriting. And then some friends and I started something called the Ministry to Business Guide. And we also have the Ministry to Business Huddle. And none of that would have happened had we all not gotten put in a timeout, right? And the goal of the Ministry to Business Guide and the Huddle is to help creatives take the next step in their purpose and their projects, which that's one of my favorite things to do. And so we've helped people be able to pivot during this time, because a couple of my friends that speak full-time, it was a big financial blow, plus just the disappointment of not being able to go encourage people. And so, yes, it was definitely the year of figuring out how do we keep walking out our calling, even though the methods are looking different.
That is so true. And I did get that guide, and that is, so obviously God was still using you during this shutdown time. The enemy was trying to get us quiet, but it did not work. So that's awesome. So I like to ask my guests some fun facts. And you and I actually share something similar on our bucket lists. And it's something I've always wanted to do and you've always wanted to do, but most people, I think it would be the last thing, or it would never even be on their bucket list. You know what I'm talking about?
It's probably maybe singing the national anthem or being on Broadway, something along those lines.
All of that. Yes. You've sung the national anthem, but you want to be singing it like in a baseball field, right?
I guess so. Now that the older I've gotten, it sounds a little more nerve-wracking than it used to. But Sherry, I don't know if your listeners know, but you are an incredible singer. Have you ever shared some of your singing with them? Because we were joking before the podcast that in my Christmas book that I would love to become a movie or musical. I'm like, Sherry, I must cast you in the musical because you have pipes, girl.
Thank you. I have not shared that with my listeners yet.
Now they know,
Thank you.
or you're going to edit this out.
I hadn't thought about that. That's a good one. Maybe season 2. One question that I ask every guest is, looking back in your life, how far back can you see the very purpose that you are living out today in who you've always been?
Sherry, I'm a firstborn girl. There's 3 other siblings and then me, so 4 total. And from a young age, I loved to perform. My mom was a piano player. And so I'd tip her light on the top of her piano up on the ceiling so it would cascade down to make kind of like a makeshift spotlight. And I would dance and I would sing and I would play the piano. And I've always loved doing that ever since I was little. And I still do that.
I love that.
I mean, I don't twirl anymore, but I like to.
You should twirl. I could twirl.
I get dizzy. Equilibrium.
A couple turns. So today we are talking about your new book, A Very Bavarian Christmas. And it's a perfect timing because we're heading into the Christmas season. And I would love a glimpse and a little bit of background to this book, and if it has a personal story behind it.
Sure. Well, the reason I wrote a fiction book, because I'd written nonfiction before, is I came across some disappointments at work. I thought, I'm going to write this second nonfiction book, and we ran into some closed doors. And so I was devastated. That was just not the plan, right? For a writer. And my family and I actually in the summer, we went to this huge Christmas store. And it was so much fun. We just were carefree, having a blast. And I'm like, surely someone has, written a book about a place like this. And so it inspired me to start writing fiction. And so it was a pivot, right? It was like, okay, I thought I was going this direction and I might return to it, but right now this isn't happening. So I pivoted. And one comment my husband made as I was writing this book, he's like, you just keep smiling while you're writing it. He said, when you wrote, your other books, your brow is furrowed and you're really, trying to get the theology right. But Sherry, when you're making things up, it's hard to get it wrong, right? Although everyone has their opinions about how stories should go, but it's just been pure joy. But it was really birthed out of some disappointments.
That's great. I love hearing the history behind some of the lessons and thoughts behind this book. And so I remember the journey that you had while writing this book, because I was honored enough to be on your prayer team, and we would text a little bit back and forth. And what I liked about that relationship is all you would have to do is say, pray for me. And that's all you had to say. And it's like, okay, I'm on it. I didn't need a whole long, what was going on, but just knowing that I was lifting you up and that I was, hopefully getting you a little bit of peace through that process. And to watch this process and the timing of the release of this book has been so profound. And so as you were writing it, what were some of the struggles as far as the timing? And then what were some of the surprises that came along?
Well, I think I'll start with, just some of the surprises. When you write a book, it's kind of like prophecy. That sounds like a really strong word, but you're writing for a future date that you don't know what the world is going to be like. And so, as a Christian writer, it's like, I've got to trust that what I'm saying is going to resonate with my audience, period. But also I had no idea, Sherry, that the world was going to be shut down. that life was going to feel so heavy and that people just needed kind of an escape or something to just uplift them, and something that doesn't, like, it doesn't all tie up in a completely tidy bow, but it resolves, I would say, satisfactory, right? Because we don't need more open-ended
Right.
things right now. We need something that we're like, okay, there was a finish to that was desirable. And so that is my prayer for this book, that there's so many hurting hearts, weary hearts, that it would just be a lift, something that warms them from the inside, that they can relate to. And something I tried really hard in this book is I didn't want it to be trite. Like, there's funny parts in there, but I also try to put some deeper things in there that hopefully people can relate to in their real life. Because I think sometimes when we watch, these really lighthearted Christmas movies, we're like, that's great, but that's nothing like my life. And so I want to include some things that people could feel like, oh, I've struggled with that too, or yeah, I've lost someone too, or whatever it might be, that I hope they can relate to.
Absolutely. And that is why I loved it so much. So I'm going to share how it related to me and how it has been such a blessing for me. And, I read it on my Kindle, but I actually want to get a copy because I am moving, and where I'm moving to, I have a real fireplace. I've always loved my fireplace in this house. It's a beautiful fireplace, but I want to sit with that book and a cup of tea and hear the crackling of the fire. It's just going to make it perfect. But one of the lessons, there are so many hidden lessons in this book, and the ones that I'm going to talk about are ones that impacted me. And what made it so relevant for me as I'm closing the year 2020 is a reminder that, God knows the plans he has for me. And this year I have had to pivot. I've even had to make a 180-degree turn from where I thought I was going and the roles that I would have as an empty nest mom, and where I saw my ministry going now that I didn't have, all the kids here. And then back to 180 kids back home, everything closing down. And now I'm able to look back at the end of this year and see how God still used me to serve where I love to serve, even though it wasn't where I was expected. And so I really related to Holly Noel. And I would love it if you would introduce us to Holly Noel and how she might have had a similar incident as me.
Sure. So my main character is a 30 something, and she's from a small town called Bavarian Falls, and it's a Christmas themed town. And her birthday is on Christmas Eve, naturally, right? And she used to like Christmas, but then she had something really hard happen in her family where she really doesn't like it and doesn't really want anything to do with that, the small town, or Christmas. And so she was an art student. She got an art degree. She moved to the city to start up this community art space, and it did not work out. So she's back in her hometown for the holidays, having this seasonal job, painting ornaments, not how she envisioned she'd be using her art degree. And she just feels like a failure. This was not how this was supposed to go. I was supposed to launch and spread my wings. And so she's really struggling with just kind of, regrouping. And it's hard to do that when you're living in your, childhood bedroom. That can be hard on the ego. And sometimes, I don't know if you're like this, Sherry, but when I go to visit my parents, something about my 44-year-old self reverts to about a 12-year-old, right? Or a 13-year-old. And I whine and all this, it's like just so easy to go right back there. And so that's where we find Holly. She didn't think she'd still be single in her 30s. So she's struggling with that. She's like, how do I live out my purpose in this town that I've tried so hard to get away from?
Yeah. And I think anyone that had to go back home from COVID could relate to that as well. And so, like you said, she's struggling with how things should have been and how they used to be. And I think, like you said, the holidays makes that so hard for her. And for all of us, the holidays are usually full of traditions. And sometimes I believe that we hang on to the tradition, hoping that it might fix the current reality that we're in. And Holly, I think, tried to bring some of those traditions, hoping it would make up for what she was going through. And there are some great lessons that not only she learned, but I think they're life lessons, because we're going to have to grasp a different holiday this season than we've had before. And so what is some hope for us in her discovery and how she's, changing the whole holiday season thought process?
Yeah, well, one thing, I mean, Holly kind of goes on this journey, right? And one thing she has to do is face some of these hard things in her past. So there's this line, there's a couple original songs that are in the book, the lyrics to them, and one says, "The key to peace is turning to face that which holds you down."
Mhm.
The way to freedom is not out of reach. Turn the knob, let yourself be found. But sometimes I think we're trying so hard to move forward, but maybe we haven't dealt with some of those hard things in our lives. Because let's face it, that's hard work.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easier to just try to plow forward. And we don't
Mhm.
want to live in the past, but sometimes we need to face some of those hurts and things that have happened so that we can walk into our present and our future more whole. And so Holly goes to counseling in the book and just discovers kind of how to let go of some of those things that she cannot change, but then also how to appreciate what she still has and what she does have. Because I think when we're trying to make everything like it used to be, this has happened to me this year for sure. If I wanted the same back to school situation or the same sports scenarios for my kids, it's not going to happen this year. So I could continually be frustrated, or I could learn to look for those good things in the current situation. And that doesn't mean you just, act like Pollyanna, like everything's fine. It's not a fake thing, but it's also when we let go that, okay, this, even when you said the holidays, like I haven't even gotten that far, Sherry, to think about, oh, what's that going to mean for, seeing my parents or
Yeah.
all of that. But I think, one positive, I know we're all tired of Zoom, but I've actually talked to my parents more, that way than I might have. And my mom's been reading every Monday. We homeschool some of our kids. So she reads to the 7-year-old and the 4-year-old over FaceTime. And my mom used to be a teacher. And so that's just a gift of this time, even though it's not ideal and we'd rather be in person, but we wouldn't have done that in person every week. So I think like Holly, just trying to see, okay, I can't change this. I can keep being mad about it or hurt by it, or I can choose to see those things that are maybe different than I expected, but still are good gifts.
That is awesome. Yes, exactly. And speaking of counseling, I had a situation with a counselor where, like Holly, I kind of was relating to this when I was listening to her describe her family situation. Um, that it's easy to look at a situation that has happened in my life and think that I'm the only one that's really hurt by it. And that if others aren't experiencing it or handling it the way I am, that they might not have been hurt as bad or even at all. And that happened in our family a few years back. A situation happened that really impacted one of the people in my immediate family. And it impacted them specifically, but all of us were hurt by this situation. And our family counselor said, this is kind of like a car accident. Everyone in the car got hurt, but one person got hurt the worst. And, we were all there. We were all in this together. We were all excited about these things happening. And when they didn't, even though one person got hurt the worst, we were all together in this car. We were all in the accident. And it made me think of what Holly learns about her family dynamic when she was focusing only on her pain. I don't know if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, because we have Thanksgiving coming up, it's especially, um, you know, appropriate is that at when they're at Holly's at her house, her childhood home, and her brother and his wife come home, and their daughter and her mom and dad are there, and her dad has a disability, which you can read more about that in the book. But Holly's been so focused on how this has impacted her life that
Mhm.
she hasn't really stopped to think how it impacted her mom and her brother. And just, her brother's this kind of gregarious, outgoing guy, teases her and that kind of thing. And his wife brings up, that Gabe did all these things, but he was really hurting. And no one was really asking him how he was. And so she kind of starts to see as she matures throughout the book, like, oh, this impacted them too, but from a different lens. And I think that can, like you said, just be a good life lesson of, I've heard this when like a spouse, maybe there's a miscarriage or a child has died, the husband and wife could grieve differently. And sometimes you can feel like, aren't you sad about this? Like, I can't even get out of bed, but maybe they are grieving in a different way. And I think that's just a thing we should all keep in mind, especially over the holidays. Sherry, in our family, we adopted our fourth child, but before we adopted him, we had been waiting about 2 years to adopt. And we had a failed adoption attempt, which was like my worst fear, right? You hear about this on Lifetime movies. And I was like, not us, not us. And it was really hard. And that happens it happened on Deer Hunting Day, which is November 15th. So we just had that, right? In 2012. And so it's right before the holidays. And I just remember grieving, especially that first year. And it was hard because everyone else was happy. And that's kind of the main character's issue too, Holly Noel. She's like, everyone's so celebratory, but this reminds me of like the worst time of my life. And I think it's just good reminder for all of us to realize the holidays are really hard for some people, and it might be even hard for you. And so how can we give space for that, but also just let people know we're there for them if they want to be around other people, to invite them to things, even if they decline them, but just to be sensitive to that as we move into the holiday season.
Yeah, thank you. I need to hear that as well. There are two original songs, like you mentioned in your book, and I love that term that you said. The key to peace is turning and facing. And like like the counselor mentions, a phrase came to my mind. There comes a time when you have to give up hope of having a better past. And I think Holly Noel kept trying to do something that she hoped would fix what had happened. But like you say in this phrase, we can't move forward. We accept what it is, give up hope of fixing it, but that way we can move forward. And so I just wanted to say that when you're talking about the songs you wrote, because it was such a good point. There is one area before we close up that was really, really impacted me a lot. And it's a scene in the book that resonates not only with me, but I think it's going to resonate with my listeners as well. Holly sees the current situation that she's in. Like you said, she was this artist that wanted to be in the city and produce these beautiful art pieces. And she's in a current job where now she's painting on ornaments. And she sees this as just a menial little job that she's got to do for now until she becomes discovered. And Nick makes such a powerful statement. And he says, I think it takes courage to regroup. You're still using your talents for the good of others. I've heard that you're the best custom painter on staff. And just think of how many homes your ornament art will be displayed in this season. And I loved that so much because she realizes then that, she might have missed the boat, but God had provided a bus or a train. And as long as we're standing on that dock watching that boat that we think we needed to be on, we're missing all the other things God brings to us. And she had envisioned these art pieces that would have only might have blessed one or two homes. And now she was blessing others. And I just liken that to how so many people feel that if one thing isn't going the way they thought, God can't use them in another way and it'd be just a blessing. But I would love it if you would continue to share the rest of what Nick tells her and how God is wanting to use the very purpose that he gave us today right here where he's placed us.
Yeah. Well, Nick goes on to say to Holly, he's like, whether you live in the city, you stay here, you go somewhere else, you're a true artist. And he also talks about she's an artist, not just what she does with a paintbrush, but in how she cares for other people. And I love the point you brought up, Sherry. You said it so beautifully, is that sometimes we're so focused on, like, for instance, if I would have said, okay, I'm not writing another book until it can be this one that I thought I was going to write. But God didn't say you're not a writer anymore. He said, okay, let's turn around the other way. Let's see this from a different perspective and let's try something else. I just pitched 2 kids' books as well. So we'll see what happens. But I think the bigger point that you brought up is if God has made you to be an encourager, let's say, He can do that if you're a nurse. He can do that if you're a mom at home. He can do that if you're living in the nursing home, right? Whatever it is, if you're an encourager, it can look a lot of different ways. Maybe you used to speak on a stage and now you're writing cards for people to get in their mailbox because you have to social distance. I just think it's more about that purpose God has put in us that can be manifested so many different ways. And I think we put ourselves in a box sometimes where we're like, well, it has to look this way or it doesn't count. But just like with Holly, like she wanted to have this big, art piece in Chicago, like for all to see, but actually all these homes are now carrying these personalized ornaments that are so meaningful to them that they're not going to be done when the exhibit leaves town. They're going to have these as keepsakes and pass them on to their kids. And sometimes I think we think of grandiose purposes, but actually it could be these smaller ways that actually have a even bigger impact than we realize.
Yes. Amen. Well, thank you so much for closing out season 1 with me. I mean, it is so special that I get to talk with you, and I just want to thank you. And I want to also thank my listeners for the support they've given me, the emails and the encouraging reviews. And so as a gift, you have so graciously offered to send a copy of your new book to one of my listeners to start the Christmas season off. So thank you. And so if you're watching or listening, you can go to the podcast page on my webpage, click the episode, which is going to be 120, and comment below on how this topic has meant something to you and how you look forward to reading this book as you close out the year 2020. So thank you so much, Katie, and all the links to this book, to your ministry, I'm going to have in the show notes. And I just wish you a very Merry Christmas.
You too, Sherry. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode with Katie Reid. Christmas is a time that can trigger so many emotions. One that I think that resonates with all of us is anticipation. No matter what you are going through this Christmas, it can be a season that we say yes to what God has planned for us. Will you, like Holly and Noel, say yes to things even if you do not know how they will go? The gift that Jesus gave us when he said yes to his Father's plan is Emmanuel. God is with us, and saying yes back is opening our heart and our hands to receiving it. Don't forget to leave a comment about today's episode and why you would enjoy reading this book. Leave that comment today, November 17th, 2020, and before November 24th, 2020, and you will be entered into a drawing to win Katie's book. This is an offer to those living in the United States. The links to connect with Katie and purchase her books and listen to her podcast are in the show notes. And if this message blessed you and you know someone who would be blessed by it, please share. I'd also be very grateful if you would subscribe so that you don't miss other great guests. And if this is your first time listening to Your Spiritual Game Plan, be sure to go back and listen to other episodes. Then give the show a rating and leave an honest review. God has always had a purpose for you in the plans that he made long ago. And I hope that as you go into the holiday season, you will say yes.